a LitHub Radio podcast.
Hello, Memoir Nation listeners. This is Brooke Warner. I'm really excited that we're kicking off a new season today, so welcome. This is our first show back. I also wanted to let you know that I am co-hosting with Linda Joy Myers, who I teach memoir with, another of our regular fall and spring courses. This one is called Back to the Basics. And I'm especially excited for Back to the Basics right now. It just feels very well timed. It's a good moment to restart and rethink all that you think you know about memoir. So if you're interested, consider the teachers. We're doing Action and Conflict with Piper Kerman, author of Orange is the New Black. Character and Characterization with Ashley C. Ford, author of Somebody's Daughter. Scene Foundations with Janine Ouellette, author of The Parts That Burn. And Choosing Which Scenes to Write with E.J. Koh, author of The Magical Language of Others. And then Linda Joy and I are also teaching. Linda Joy will be teaching Memory and the Narrative Lens, and I will be teaching Reflection and Takeaway. We have just been advocating for almost 2 years now about the evolution of memoir and experimentation in memoir. And we started to realize that it's time to come back to the basics and re-examine those foundational aspects of memoir. So we would love it if you join us, at least check it out, see what it's all about. It'll be running from September 8th to October 13th. The link is at magicofmemoir.com. And it's $299. All classes are recorded. And per usual, super excited about the lineup. So hope you'll check it out at magicofmemoir.com. And thanks. Hello, ear witnesses, audionauts, and verse voyagers. Welcome to a special show. I am Brooke Warner. I'm here with my co-host, Grant Faulkner. And Grant, will you do the honors and say what's special about this week's episode?
Yeah, many things are special, but I'd love to just focus on one or two things come to mind. One, it's our first show of our new season, which is our 8th season, meaning that we're coming into our 8th year and episode 360 something, I think, which means we've interviewed almost every living writer who has ever written a book. And I can't remember all of their names, you know, and also this will be our first full year as Memoir Nation since we just rebranded back in March. And so we're formalizing or maybe memorializing this memoir thing, which is exciting.
It is exciting, yes. And I am so pleased that we have Myriam Gurba as our guest today to kick off season 8. Myriam is a writer and author that I have long admired, and I was turned on to her work in 2020 because of this scathing review she wrote about American Dirt, and she is going to share the story with us, which is exciting. And that was a novel that stirred up a lot of controversy because of its depiction of Mexico and Mexicans from an author who was said to be culturally appropriating, but it wasn't so much that really pissed people off. You know, the scandal was about what authors merit publishing's attention, because Janine Cummings, the author of that book, she got so much attention and a lot of money and a lot of promotional dollars. And the way that her publisher positioned her work was just shined a light on publishing's inequities. I want to say I was all up in that drama at the time. And still, I can't hold a candle to the Myriam style takedown. And my feeling at the time was like, oh my gosh, if you're in her sights as someone that she wants to take issue with, it is over, because she is so incisive and she can be very cutting in her reviews. And in the interview, I tell her, like, I think she's fearless. And I definitely see that in her writing and in her online persona. And it makes me feel sometimes a little intimidated by her, but it is totally still in a fangirl way. Like, for instance, I am pretty sick of Facebook right now. And I've been going on less and less. But Myriam is someone who I will look up and see what she's doing because I admire her takes on things in the world. And, lately, just this year, for instance, she was commenting a lot on the fires, the aftermath of Los Angeles and what was going on there. And then very particularly the bullshit that is going on with ICE in Los Angeles. And she's been active and an activist and a source of information and clarity for me.
Yeah, she's galvanizing with her thought and her comments, and that was my first introduction to her as well, was following her online. And one of the things I find really interesting about Myriam's work is that it's just so expansive and so unique. You know, we've had a lot of authors on the show over the years, and particularly in the last couple, who've been experimenting with hybrid forms and with genre blending. And Myriam has been doing this from the get-go. Her book Mean is a kind of genre blender because it's a memoir, but it's also true crime. She situates the story of her own sexual assault within another story where the girl got killed by the same perpetrator. And so she's unpacking that story along with so much else. And I was super pleased to see that in her new book that's coming out next month, the book called Poppy State, that she has photos accompanying most of her pieces. And I do think we're going to be seeing more and more of this as the publishing industry seems to be embracing photographical pairings with chapters and essays. And that's something I've been totally obsessed with. And of course, I have my own, what I'm calling a flash novel coming out. That's a series of linked little stories written to the prompts of my friend Gail Butinsky's photos of the Southwest, and Carmen Maria Machado called Poppy State a propulsive, unclassifiable book. And I know you think that that's a compliment coming from Machado, Brooke.
Yeah, 100%. You know, I think one of the things that's happening in personal narrative and in nonfiction right now is really around creativity of form. And people are playing, you know, but writers like Carmen Maria Machado and certainly Myriam Gurba, they're virtuosos. You know, I mean, I love when I am surprised when I read, because I so rarely am, which is a little bit sad. And so I just feel like I've done a full-on sudsy soaking bath in Myriam's work in the past couple of weeks. And I'm just really taken with her language, and a little bit mad at myself for not having read her books earlier, but I have read her essays, you know, and in my life, there are so many books and my piles are high. So having a guest on the show can really create a priority lane for a particular writer. And I have been driving in Myriam's passenger seat here for a few weeks and, you know, reading Mean and Creep and part of Poppy State. And this whole thing of being surprised is it's just something that I'm really taking in.
Well, now I want to take it a step further. What surprised you that was particularly stood out, I guess?
I'm glad we're talking about it because it's the theme that I chose for today's show. I mean, people, I hope, know that we still are thinking about things in a thematic way, and we have to think of a theme for the guests. And so the theme is language. She unapologetically uses Spanish and Spanglish and often doesn't feel the need to translate per se. She often writes words and then tells you what those words mean in a way that is funny or surprising, or she just trusts you that you're going to like get her or not get her. And I think also because I grew up in California, I love her California insiderisms. Like take this passage, for instance. She writes, "I didn't know Mexicans were Mexicans, a category some mistake for subhuman. Today, I understand that words are for every Juan, but every Juan is not for every word." And so I don't know, like I laughed out loud at that. You know, she uses a lot of puns and plays on words, and she's super clever and not just like smart. I mean, smart is smart, but clever is something different. And so in conveying something to our listeners, you know, who are also writers today, Grant, I want to ask people to read Myriam's work and to really absorb her words, because this is like the opposite of boring and pedestrian. And I think that, you know, I wanted to ask her about that out the gate, because it's like, how does that come to her? And I'm so glad that she talked about obsessing over words and reading words aloud. If you want to have, you know, surprising and interesting content, I think it's not just a matter of like your first draft is fine and then you move along, right? And Grant, I know you're a word connoisseur yourself, and it's something I think we haven't really talked about as much as we should, because the whole notion of the words you choose and how you choose them can feel kind of like minutia because they're just words. But I'd love to hear your thought on it, because when we talk and when we do these episodes, I often think that the words you come up with and the way you express yourself, you know, you surprise me sometimes and come up with, you know, kind of a dance of language and words on the page. So I wonder if you could say more.
Yeah, well, thank you. And that's so interesting that you mentioned it, actually, because early on as a writer, I definitely didn't feel like I had much of a vocabulary or much of the type of playful linguistic flourishes that you mentioned. And in fact, I remember when I first started writing, I read a quote by a writer who said that a writer shouldn't know too many words because once you know a word, you have to use it. And I kind of took refuge in that because I knew I was deficient, and it was interesting hearing Myriam talk about how she grew up in this family where wordplay was kind of constant. So she just took it for granted. So I was the opposite of that. And I wonder if some of my random wordsmithing, comes from that feeling of a deficit, actually, of a need to find a better way to express things. But I do think in the end, it actually just comes from working with words like a painter works with paint. Words are my artistic materials. So the more I work with them, the more I gain confidence and the more I see combinations and shadings and nuances and juxtapositions in words. And also the more I absorb other writers' play on the page. Plus, I think there's just something about getting older where life and representing life I'm more tuned to its complications. It's so layered. And our words are the main tool we have to try to convey those complications and contradictions. So I kind of think life becomes a search for the right word in short, on the page and in real life.
Yeah, I love that, Grant. And I also think it's encouraging to hear you say that because we don't have to have a taught or particularly scholarly vocabulary to be fun and wild with our words or to surprise and delight with our words. So there is something to ponder, everyone, during this brief moment of pause, otherwise known as a break. We will be right back.
Well, Brooke, I'm always so pleased when we have a sponsor whose products and services I've actually used and enjoyed independently. And that's the case with Gotham Writers Workshop. I took my first class with them nearly 20 years ago, and it was an online class, my first online class ever. And I had my MFA at the time, and I have to say that my Gotham class was as good as any of my MFA classes. And in fact, the great writer Manuel Gonzalez taught it. But it wasn't just about Manuel. All of the students in the course were super smart and really good writers. And amazingly enough, I'm still in touch with some of them. So I wholeheartedly recommend taking any of Gotham's courses.
I love that so much. And Gotham definitely has a high pedigree and it's been around for a long time. They offer creative writing classes in New York City, but also over Zoom and also asynchronous classes that you can take online. And so you can be anywhere in the world. And they have an amazing breadth of offerings, Grant. They offer memoir classes, woohoo, but also other nonfiction as well as fiction, poetry, songwriting, and many others. And with super qualified instructors and for an affordable price.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, they are very much about community, so you can stay involved with Gotham in a number of ways, and they even put on conferences. And writers often ask me how to find a writing group or a beta reader, and I think taking a class is a great way to find good writing partner matches. So develop your craft and join a vibrant community of writers at Gotham Writers Workshop.
Yes, you can find them at gothamwriters.com to see what classes are starting. Use our code, please, Memoir Nation at checkout for $40 off your first 6 or 10-week class. Some restrictions apply there, but definitely go check it out. And so endorse them, Grant.
Yeah. So one more time, visit gothamwriters.com to see what classes are starting soon and use the code Memoir Nation, all one word, Memoir and Nation with no space between them, at checkout for $40 off your first 6 or 10-week class. Some restrictions apply. And tell them that Grant sent you and Brooke too.
Welcome back, everyone. I am so excited to welcome Myriam Gurba to the show today. And Myriam is the author of 4 books: Dahlia Season, which won the Edmund White Award for debut fiction, Painting Their Portraits in Winter, Mean, which was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in LGBTQ nonfiction, and Creep, Accusations and Confessions, which is an essay collection that was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Myriam's writing has been widely anthologized and has appeared all over the place in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Harper's Bazaar, Believer, Paris Review, and elsewhere. She's also a teacher, an editor, an anti-rape activist, a public speaker, a practitioner of plant-based magic, and a co-founder of Dignidad Literaria, a grassroots organization that combats white supremacy in the publishing industry. Holy cow, Myriam. I am so excited to have you. Thank you for being on with us today.
Yay! Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Oh, good. It's been a long time coming for us. You've been on our wish list for a while, so this is great. And, one of the really cool things about doing this show is that Grant and I get to get immersed in someone's writing, especially rooting around for what we think the theme of the show would be. And I got turned on to your work actually in the aftermath of the American Dirt scandal saga. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but I read some of your essays at that time. But then in preparation for today, I read Mean and Creep back to back.
That's a lot.
It is a lot, but I've got it and was up for it for sure. And then a little bit of your new book, Poppy State, that is coming out in October, which you graciously sent to me. And what I kept coming back to over and over again is your language. Like your language, your choice of words is so stunning, often surprising, fun, playful, shocking. And so I just wanted to start here. If you could talk about word choice and how much of that just flows from your expression or how much of it is around like you doing revision and mulling over how you want to say something.
Wow, I'm so impressed that you read Mean and Creep back to back. I'm surprised you're not in therapy right now.
I couldn't get enough. It was awesome, actually. I highly recommend it.
Those are really intense books. And thank you for the compliment on my use of language. I really appreciate it. I think it's appropriate to say that I'm in love with language. I don't know if language is in love with me, but but I'm in love with it, and it's been a lifelong romance. And I think that that's partially my dad's fault because he's trained as a linguist, and so language and thinking about language and talking about language were very common activities in the house where I grew up. And a lot of the humor that I was first exposed to, like the humor in our household, was word-based humor. A lot of it was punning. And I thought that everybody's family was like that. I thought that everybody sat around and punned with their families. And then I learned that that was not the case, that some people really don't appreciate that. But as far as the way that the words come in the process of writing, often they come to me in a really intuitive way, but there is also a lot of shaping and pruning and replacement that happens during the editing phase. I really enjoy revision and I really enjoy editing. And part of my editing process is also highly auditory. I read everything that I write aloud to myself until I get a just right feeling in the pit of my stomach. And I don't consider work finished until I get that sensation. And so I read my work compulsively, and I read it over and over and over. And it has such an effect that it imprints the narrative. And I often have my narratives memorized as a result of that reading and rereading.
Wow. Well, in keeping with Brooke's observation about your language, you're obviously a literary writer, and you've been called a dynamic literary voice. And I'm just curious about how you relate to the word literary for a couple different reasons. I mean, one is that literary often is synonymous with doesn't sell well, but then for me, it's kind of the category. Like I've often not liked or been uncomfortable with the description of literary fiction because it carries some elitist baggage, and it's sometimes positioned as other or better than other genres. So it kind of comes with a gate that can feel hard to open, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a snobby word, but at the same time, it is a word that I embrace. I like the word, and I'm partial to the word, and I will use it on occasion. But I don't necessarily use the word to describe my own work. But I do like the word. I also think that the word has a campy quality to it. And I'm very attracted to camp. I always have been. I was even a campy child. I love campy children. And so for me, invoking the notion of the literary intersects with camp. And so in that regard, I do kind of embrace it.
That's so interesting, Myriam. I wonder if you could say a little bit more for our listeners who don't really, I'm imagining some of our listeners might not know exactly what you mean by that. And because you have such interesting word associations, I wonder if you could just take that a little bit farther, like the whole literary camp thing, because that I'm curious to know more too.
Sure. So I'm thinking specifically of Susan Sontag's Notes on Camp and the way in which sort of camp refers to artifice that almost transcends artifice because it is so artificial.
I gotcha.
And so the word literary suggests that to me, something that is so overwrought that it almost transcends the overwrought and becomes organic once again.
Got it.
And so I really like language that relates to those sorts of extremes, because the extreme pushes up against humor. And so I tend to embrace words like that.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Because now that you say that, I can definitely see that in some of your word choices and just how you put things on the page. And in keeping with this idea of words, I wanted to ask you about the word fearless, because I definitely think you're a fearless writer. You write things that push the envelope. And I think I was most struck by, just you write things that you think and that people think, nodding to the fact that we shouldn't think or say those things out loud. And I found that kind of a recurring theme in your work, like things that are judgmental. Obviously, you wrote a book about being mean. And in Mean, there are a few passages. And just to get a flavor, I wanted to share some of these with our listeners to capture your voice. Like, for instance, you write, being mean makes us feel alive. It's fun and exciting. Sometimes it keeps us alive. And then in another place you write, I'm not so mean that I've ever raped anybody. That's a special kind of mean. And there's so much more. I will endorse this book wholeheartedly. I'm really curious to know what you think about the current state of mean given our culture right now. Like, this book published in 2017, but I feel like we're meaner than we were, but maybe not. Maybe it's just the visibility of meanness. And so I wondered if I could get your take on that.
Well, I think that meanness is a tool. And tools are value neutral, right? And so a scalpel can be used to kill and a scalpel can be used to heal. And meanness is that scalpel. It can be used to prolong somebody's life and keep them alive and aid in survival. And meanness can also be used to beat somebody down and destroy them. I really think that that I value and evaluate meanness depending on how it's being deployed, right? And I think that, you're alluding to the fascism that we're living under at the moment. And one of its hallmarks isn't just meanness, but it's a particular kind of crass, crude, and tacky meanness.
Right.
And there are some iterations of the tacky that I appreciate, but fascist tacky isn't one of them.
Good to know.
And so when I wrote Mean and I chose that word as the memoir's title, I use that word because I think of it as very multifaceted. It has these different faces that come with different meanings, right? And so on the one hand, you have mean in terms of petty cruelty. So that's typically how people use the word mean. When they're describing a mean girl, they're referring to a girl's sort of petty acts of cruelty, right? But then there's also the notion of the mathematical mean, as in mean, median, and mode. And what I was trying to express through mean is that I don't have an experience or a lived experience that's particularly extraordinary. It's quite average. And so it kind of does reflect the mean. And then the other element of mean that's part of that title is that as a survivor of ongoing sexual violence, because I write quite a bit about these different instances of sexual violence that I survived during my youth, in the aftermath of those experiences, I had to figure out how to make meaning out of them. So I didn't want for the experiences that I had endured to be in vain. And that's, again, a really common experience among survivors. What do we do with these broken pieces? How do we put them back together? How do we move forward? And then construct some sort of meaning that inspires us to thrive and might inspire others as well. And so one monosyllabic word with 4 letters was packed with that much meaning for me.
You set me up for my question there, because your books are so multi-layered and there's so much to unpack in them, and you just definitely can't sum up what they're about in a single sentence. You do a lot of critical analysis and you make all these kind of interesting and unexpected connections in your writing, just like you did right now with the word mean. And so I'm curious to know how when you've landed on a subject or topic that you want to write about, and if there's an example you can pull from. We'd love an anecdote.
Sure. I know that I've arrived at a subject that impassions me when the subject becomes an intellectual obsession that fascinates me, that I can't seem to let go of, and that invites me sort of to drill down into these wormholes where I get lost researching the subject, theorizing about the subject, contemplating the subject, considering the subject, evaluating it, weighing it. And so it really does have sort of the feel of almost like a maniacal obsession, you know? And there are certain sort of like intellectual obsessions that I've nurtured for a very long time that don't seem to be declining in interest for me. For example, gender-based violence is one of those subjects. White supremacy, xenophobia, and racism are like another sort of category that moves together, that continues to sort of draw my attention and interest me. And then I'm also very interested in all things occult and esoteric and magic. And so that's been creeping into my writing much more as of late. And so I'll give an example of how that kind of intellectual obsession or passion or even like mania can fuel work. So earlier, Brooke, you were mentioning the novel American Dirt. And I wrote a critical essay about that book that went viral. And the way that essay came into being was that I was contacted by an editor and invited to review American Dirt for Ms. Magazine. And I had reviewed books for them before. And when I received the book, I knew nothing about it. And I could tell very little about it from the cover. Like often you can tell a bit about a book by its cover, but this cover was a bit elusive. And given the title, American Dirt, for some reason, I thought it had to do with like agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good assumption.
So I was like, oh. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. They're asking me to review a novel about agricultural life, which isn't what I'm often invited to read, right? Because typically I'm sent books about racism or gender-based violence. Like people sort of know that's my wheelhouse. And so I thought, this is really different. And so I threw the book in my suitcase and I went to Mexico to stay with family during Thanksgiving. And while I was at my aunt's house in Mexico, I started reading American Dirt. And I was horrified because it was a tawdry narco thriller that wildly misrepresented Mexico, in my opinion. And as I was reading the book, I would stare at the page and read about sort of this version of Mexico that I describe as like a gringo fantasia. And then I would look up from the book and see the real Mexico. And then I would return to the page. And so it was this maddening experience. And I didn't want to finish the book, but then I decided to really commit myself to it as a hate reader. Right? I was like, I'm going to hate read the shit out of this. So like, I got down to it and I was really intent on panning this book because the book seemed very pernicious to me, especially in terms of the stereotypes that it was promoting and the fact that it was going to be published and celebrated around the same time that President Donald Trump was discussing the invasion of Mexico.
Right.
And so I thought to myself, like, a book like this is going to provide fodder for his xenophobic and racist arguments, because I consider the book to be racist and xenophobic. And so I felt like it was very important for me to critique the book. And when Ms. declined to publish the review, I got pissed because I didn't believe the reason that they gave me for wanting for their rejection. I didn't believe them. And then when I discovered that the book had been chosen by Oprah as a book club read, I felt that it was even more important to have a public discourse about the book, considering how many hands the book was going to be in. And so that's sort of an example of how I get sort of impassioned to pursue a subject and then get my thoughts in print.
I love it. And like I said, I mean, that's actually how I got turned on to your work, was from that essay that went viral. And then I was like, who is this woman? Oh my gosh. And I have very much enjoyed your stuff ever since. And I think I was going to say, I mean, I was going to ask you a question about American Dirt. So I'm so glad you covered it, because it sort of steps into other things that I wanted to ask you about in Creep, because in Creep, you're scrutinizing creepy individuals and systems and cultural norms. And it's all around this stuff of like, looking at the ways that we systemically enable abuse and oppression, how we're complicit. And I have learned a lot just from reading the stuff that you post online. I mean, now having read the book, I think that's why I liked it so much, is you're opening eyes, but of course your eyes have to want to be opened, you know? And so I wanted to ask you about it, because another place that I learned something from you was about Joan Didion, you know, and her racial grammar. And I think, you know, it's like you're sort of taking these sometimes people who are darlings. I mean, you could argue that Janine Cummings, who wrote American Dirt, was a chosen darling of the literary world, right? Because she got so much money and she was so celebrated. Joan Didion, of course, is like ridiculously, wildly celebrated for, you know, just being Joan Didion. And so I wanted to ask about this because, you know, doing like a necessary smackdown of someone who might be sort of elevated in the culture can also be kind of a dangerous thing to do. And I'd love to just hear, you know, because I think you're met both with, you know, wildly celebratory, you know, fandom and people who think that you're too intense. And I just would love to hear, you know, about the pros and cons of living in that space for you.
Where should I begin? So to give an example of how fraught critiquing a darling can be, within less than 24 hours of that American Dirt essay publishing, I received a concerned email from the publication's editor. And what she had to share with me was that she typically doesn't reach out to authors when they receive emails or comments that are hostile. But she felt that this comment, actually it was an email, was concerning enough that I needed to know about it. And at the time, I was still teaching high school. I was teaching advanced placement psychology to 10th and 11th graders here in California. And so I received the email from the editor, and what happened is that somebody sent an email that was from a Proton account, so it was encrypted. And it was a death threat. And it was a strange death threat too, because I've gotten death threats before that are kind of sloppy. And it's hard to take the sloppy ones seriously because it's like, you can't even get your shit together to write a good death threat. You're probably not going to come after me. But but this one was like, it seemed kind of belabored, you know? And then the other part of it that was concerning was that they wanted for me to die in a police shooting. And that felt like extra creepy. Like, you ask yourself, is the person who's sending this a police officer? Or is the person who's sending this, do they have ties to law enforcement? And so that's an example of how fraught doing this sort of work can be. And it is sometimes mind-blowing to me that literary criticism can anger people to the degree that they want you assassinated. Like,
yeah, no kidding, right?
Like, in a way, it makes me feel like a really good critic, though, because it's like I can really say that I push some buttons, you know, but I do want to stay alive. Like, I don't want anybody coming after me, but that's an example of how triggered some people can get. And soon after that essay went viral, I was removed from my teaching position at that school. And ultimately, the justification for my removal that was provided to me by the school district was as follows. They had investigated me and they had found evidence that I had worked on non-school related work while I was on campus. And so they were going to take disciplinary action against me, which would be sort of like a permanent stain on my professional record, or I could resign.
Wow.
And had they stained my record like that, I wouldn't have been able to, it would have been very difficult for me to find employment elsewhere. So I consider what they did a coerced resignation, right? And I think that there were likely several factors at play when it comes to their rationale for wanting to push me out of the school district. And I do think that among those reasons was some of the sort of, quote, scandal that was provoked by that essay, among other things.
Well, as much as I am sorry for your students who lost you, I think that we're all very privileged to have you be writing full time. And I did just want to note that, the Los Angeles Times said that you are one of our great American intellectuals. I loved seeing that because it's really true. I mean, your stuff is like profoundly deep. And so I hope everybody, at the risk of traumatizing a little bit, if you're sensitive, read Creep and Mean back to back. And if you are, if it's too much, spread it out a little bit. But I survived and they're awesome. And I really admire your work.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. That's so kind.
Thank you, Myriam.
Pleased to have you on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We'll be right back with today's book trend. Well, Grant, I wanted to discuss this trend of writers using AI to enhance their writing. And I especially wanted to talk about it in the wake of reading Myriam's books, because I experienced some kind of strong juxtapositions over these few weeks of taking in her words, just as I was oohing and awing over her word choices and her capacity to surprise me with her language and observations. I was also reviewing some submissions at She Writes Press that had been tagged by my team as having been written or enhanced by AI. And Grant, this is a trend that is really hard for me. I get that people are using AI and that they feel it's improving their writing. And part of me, because I work so hard to support writers and I really believe in, everybody's capacity and the importance of self-expression. This idea of like wanting to be supportive of writers regardless of their process comes up for me, but using AI for the creative process, for personal writing, at the same time, it's really gnawing at me. And so it's a trend that's not going anywhere. I'm wrestling with it on a heart level that's been kind of consuming, I guess is the best way to put it. And so I'm wondering what your feelings are on this trend.
Yeah, I think you're definitely getting exposed to it more and in a different way than I am. But there's definitely a part, and a huge part of writing that is so much about the soul that I can't even imagine thinking about using AI. So there's a big part of me that is just like, why write a story in any way using AI? Because the whole purpose of the act of art is to somehow put your soul into the world. And I don't know how people are using it for their personal writing. I think it could be or can be used effectively as a prompt, perhaps. I know it's super effective as a research tool. And in fact, that's how I've used it. It's like having, I don't know, a dedicated intern or a special high-powered researcher, in the house. But I think that's the extent of how I'd use it, unless people showed me interesting other ways that I don't know about. I haven't truly explored it that much, though.
Yeah, I mean, I do think if you're using it as a prompt or if you're using it as research, that's something that I don't object to so much. I mean, and I'm not also suggesting that I don't use it. That's the conundrum too. I have it. Who doesn't? Google officially sucks now. And so I found myself gravitating more and more to ChatGPT for what I used to use Google for, to look things up the way that I used to look things up on Google. And I've been really wowed by things like feeding it a spreadsheet of names and email addresses and then asking it to separate out the first and last names into separate columns. Like that's a job I used to do manually and it's so tedious. And so AI doing that kind of thing feels really nice actually. And I've used it to help me through a presentation that I had to give to our sales force. But the personal writing is very different. And I think people are feeding their writing into AI and saying, can you make this sound better, or can you help me with alternative ways to make this more fill in the blank. But I have not ever used it for my own writing. I haven't used it for my Substack posts or a personal piece. And I'm finding that I want to have a rule, or a bright line in the sand that people can't use it for their personal writing in that way. But I know it's wishful thinking. And I also, oddly enough, I start to feel like I'm being judgmental, probably because I am. And so, that's something that I wrestle with too, because I don't want to feel that way toward people's writing. But I'm also wondering, do I have to spend the rest of my reading days being judgmental of people who are using AI to enhance their writing? And so honestly, Grant, I'm just super pissed at the people who invented AI because of all of this.
Yeah, let's take them down. I mean, many people are, I guess. And I totally know what you mean. It's amazing how AI literally just came sweeping into our lives, and it's so dramatically changing the way we live, even if you're not using it. And we don't know where this is all leading, but we do know that it is leading to definitely some dark places. And one of those places is the place of creativity and expression. And I think the arena where people are grappling with this the most is in the classroom, actually. I know teachers who say AI is, it's part of our world, so they have to let the kids use it for certain things, but they're also grappling with how do you preserve the critical thinking that goes into the act of writing, and writing just by definition has pain points and pause points. And those are creative moments, the brain needs to feel those challenges to go deeper. So I just worry that kids will just start getting accustomed to pressing a button because we're creatures who really don't like discomfort, And so that's where my pessimism really comes in. Do you have a solution to make me feel better now, Brooke?
Oh gosh, I wish, I keep telling my students in my memoir classes that, if you're going to use AI to support you with your writing, please do not cut and paste its responses into your own pages. To me, if you want to use AI as a thought partner, I really do understand that impulse, and I'm not going to stop people, obviously, from doing what they're going to do. But then use it like that as a conversation partner, as a way to think about going deeper. But I think the minute AI prompts you and says, how about this language? And then you copy and paste that into your own prose. To me, that is plagiarism. Mm-hmm. And so I just feel like I want writers who really want to be writers to follow this guideline. But frankly, I want everyone to follow that guideline. And what you were just talking about with schools distresses me too, because I have a 14-year-old and he's getting exposed to all of this at a very, important time when he should be learning how to write, and probably AI will just be his writing buddy.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah, he's at that very vulnerable age where he is an experiment, essentially. But I like the test case that you mentioned, and I have seen AI in action as a type of thought partner, and it can work well like that. But then here's the question for you, Brooke. What about people who don't really care about being writers, who just want to spit something out or create content for visibility and flood the zone? And I actually just today read a man, he's searching for a ghostwriter for his business tips book. And in his ad or proposal on Readsy, he said he wasn't a writer. And now that we're talking about this, I could see a person like him deciding not to hire a ghostwriter even, and just to use AI, because he doesn't care so much about the artistry or soulful qualities of the book, just kind of getting a book out there with his business tips in it.
Yeah. And therein lies our current predicament, or one of them. I've been reading a lot about slop. I like that term a lot. Book slop, music slop, art slop. This is only going to get worse over time. It's already pretty terrible. And so, AI is just actually another thing that I sit up worrying about. Now it's ranking right up there with plastic and wildfires and earthquakes, in case anybody wants a window into my 2 a.m. mind. And like I said, I'm distressed for James and his peers. For him, Google is already a distant memory. Like, the kids are not using Google. They are only using ChatGPT. And the disincentive for the critical thinking is real. I see it, and not just in the kids. I see it in these submissions we're getting at She Writes Press. But I will circle back, Grant. It's not a solution, but at least we can end on a hopeful note, which is that when you see stuff that's really good, like I've been raving about Myriam's work today, it does revive your faith, because there's not ChatGPTing or clodding your way into extraordinary prose. AI is not extraordinary. Yeah, it is just fine. So sometimes good. And AI can and will make us, I think, appreciate true creative genius and the human mind. I hope so. Yeah. And I've even wondered if we're going to have, I don't know, special books and movies and music that's made with a stamp of made by a human someday, and I don't know, maybe it'll be a niche market for purists, hopefully a big niche market or a big market. So we'll see where this all leads, and we will be here to talk about the bad writing of AI, the fine writing of AI, or the just fine, that's what we put, just fine, maybe good writing of AI, but no more than that. I don't think so. We're mainly here to talk about the good writing, the very good writing that comes from your soul. So tune in, and please leave comments on Spotify. We will respond to them and write you back, and keep writing and writing and writing. And we'll see you back here next week for another fun and engaging episode.